when it comes to getting a job, being smart, being good enough for a basketball team to get on the team, make the team, getting a new client, you have to remember perception is a two-way street. And whether or not you're qualified for something isn't just based on your credentials, but it's based on whoever the person is hiring you in this case, or is going to be using your services, thinks you're qualified for that position. This is really important because whether it's someone who you think is smart and whether or not they are smart can be debated. What bug in my way here, I apologize. Whether or not someone is qualified for a job or whether or not someone gets a position that you'd like to have, it's not always about your ability and whether or not that person you like or enjoy is actually smart, but what you think about them. I go through social media just like you, and you see a bunch of wild stuff on there. And it kind of reminded me of a situation I talk about, which is a parallel to different topic per se, but it's of an individual trying to make a basketball team. And when it comes to making a basketball team, you don't just need to be good enough at basketball. You need to have the coach think you're good enough at basketball. And there's a big difference because I've known a lot of players who are very good at the sport, but they do little things that don't actually impact. They don't do little things that don't actually impact the game that coaches think are really important and will prioritize someone over that person. An example of that is we had a guy on one of my teams in the past. He wasn't really that great of a basketball player at all, to be honest with you. But he always got a lot of playing time because he would do things like run excessively hard at a loose ball that was already out of bounds, or he would overemphasize the setting of a screen. He would do lots of things that the coach perceived were really good things. Now, did it actually impact the basketball game? No, probably not. It's not like the screen was any better because his arm was really thrown up when he did it, or did we ever recover a loose ball every now and then? But the coach perceived it to be very important. And that's smart on him and good on him, and he found a means to play in his career by doing this. So, a successful career nonetheless. That same thing, though, goes for people who are trying to get a job, or trying to get a position. It's not necessarily are you not qualified for in the sense of your credentials. There are lots of people who are unqualified to get certain jobs because the person hiring them thinks that they are qualified. So we have this perception reality balance. And when you go on social media, we only get a small snippet of an individual. And so that individual tries to give off the perception of intelligence, or a perception of validity, or perception of knowledge, perception of whatever they're trying to sell you, basically. And in doing so, we get really much desensitized, accustomed to seeing information being presented that way. And because it's repeatedly presented that way, it kind of becomes more and more dogmatic and divisive in nature. Because if I can deliver a message that you think I have something unique for you, I only have 15 seconds. And so that kind of comes about for a lot of people in terms of how they begin to maybe organize their ideas and thoughts and whether or not they believe someone who is in that area. I'm totally distracted, by the way. I wonder if I can flip a camera. I have like extreme distraction stuff in my life. Not distraction, what do you call it? ADD? Can't even think of it. But we're going to go look at this spider really quick. Can you believe this? I'm in the middle of a podcast thing, but there's a giant spider walking around here. So we can get him. You see him? Yep, right there. How can I do a video talk with this giant spider? He just crept right around the corner over there. The corner of my eye. And now look at that giant leg he has. Wow. He's like feeling something. I think you guys can see it, right? Oh, he's on the move. He's on the move. Look at that. Wow. No way. That's so cool. Nature is pretty neat, man. Look at that thing go. I hope I'm capturing that on camera good enough. All right. Well, we're back. Sorry about that. Back to the cornfield. I think next should do the standing and walking around. We go hang out by the cornfield. Well, sorry about that. I'm gonna keep that in straight up because that's just me, so you can deal with it. So back to where I was. The reason why I'm talking about this topic of the perception reality setup is that when we go and try to acquire knowledge and information, we try to become good strength coaches. If we're so caught up and if we're confused in what intelligence is from like an actual like objective, you give me a bunch of information, I can synthesize it and give you some sort of good product. You give me a bunch of equipment, tools, methods, a 6-month program, or not program, 6-month window. I can train someone to make someone a better athlete. And that's like a smart coach, right? Versus you get caught up in what you see on social media of this like perception thing, and you start to act a certain way because you strictly act for people to perceive your intelligence. So I'll share a really quick story on that. I remember the first time I did a podcast. I was very nervous, and I think people knew who I was at that time somewhat. It was a very small podcast, and I was like shaking nervous. And we did the podcast, and I was so concerned with sounding smart, not actually being smart, not actually providing good information, but sounding smart, that I delivered the worst podcast ever. I actually messaged the guy and said, can we do it again? Even then, the podcast I did again was pretty crappy. Same goes for my first speaking engagement, my first, interview, my first several times I presented, is I was so concerned with sounding smart, the perception of intelligence, that I failed to communicate what I was trying to get across. I'm not one to admit I have the greatest communication skills in the world. Sometimes I'm good at, explaining complex topics simply, and sometimes I make simple topics more complex. I think we all do that. Sometimes I am erratic with my thoughts. If you guys follow these podcasts, you're fully aware of that. And sometimes I'm a lot more concise. But I've found myself to be much clearer, concise, and deliver a better message when you focus on what you're delivering and not necessarily what the perception is. But there are certain times, unfortunate as it may be, where you are trying to have someone perceive your intelligence. And that's the reality. That's how maybe a job interview goes. So in certain situations, just having deliverables and being very exact and precise and to the point might be what you try to accomplish, and just delivering a message. But there are times where you have to have some sort of mix of perception of intelligence, and that's just how we operate in this world. And I don't think one's better or one's worse. I think not knowing which one is which is dangerous, because then if you confuse the perception aspect with that's someone who's really smart or whatever, and you just start to mimic that, well, you might not actually be able to deliver anything. Because if you watch social media, sometimes a lot of people who just say things that are just purely perception based, they're not actually required to deliver anything. They're actually delivering something else. They're trying to gain their validity of intellect so you can trust their knowledge to buy something else. They're not actually directly selling you that information they're talking about. And that's really important to understand too. So discerning between the two. And understanding when you want to push and pull in one direction. Because there are times when you go to an interview and you might have someone who's not very knowledgeable in your area and you're trying to acquire the position, the job, whatever it might be. Yeah, you want to be very exact and be honest and tell them what you can do. But sometimes the way you say things, they might not carry the weight of interest the way you could say something else. And what I mean by that is that you could say, I do something like, you can make a job sound very boring, but someone who's detailed in that field would really understand the complexity of it. Or you could tell someone, or try to express the complexity of that to someone who doesn't have information in that field, to showcase to them that you do have some ability to handle complex topics because your knowledge is scarce. In the same way that if you were to just be a chef and you were to go make the world's greatest, what's that? I don't know, piece of bread on the surface, a layperson like myself might think a piece of bread's pretty boring and there's not much complexity to it. I'm sure there's lots of complexity to different layers and different details of bread. So someone who's knowledgeable in that field would see that and immediately understand the complexity. Someone who's not knowledgeable might need to be shown the complexity. So then I can appreciate it because I perceive that, that is a complex topic or process. You did a good job with this complex, difficult topic. I perceive you as a master bread maker. Some things to think about and consider differences between perception, reality, I should have said. Maybe that's the right way to do it. It's the yin and yang there. And how we use that to interact with different individuals. Because if you just be obsessive and trying to convince people you're good at what you do, and you're not actually good at what you do, you're not going to be doing that thing very long. Sometimes if you're really bad at convincing people that you're good at what you do, even though you are really good at what you do, you'll never get a chance to do what you want to do. So I appreciate you guys as always. Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoy. Feel free to subscribe. Hope you guys enjoy that little spider break, the detour, and take care.